Have you ever held it together all day? The care tasks, the admin, the emotional labor, the needs, and then you finally get a quiet moment and you realize you don't actually know how to turn off. Like rest doesn't feel restful. It feels unsafe, or you feel guilty, or your brain just starts replaying everything. Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Amy Grimm, and we're talking about why caregiving can quietly become a form of constant output, and how always on can become a nervous system state, not just a role. By the end of this conversation, you'll understand what's happening beneath the surface. You'll have one tiny reset you can use in real life, and you'll have one practical next step to start protecting your capacity without feeling like you're failing. Just a gentle note before we begin. Today's conversation includes burnout, chronic stress, and the emotional load of caregiving. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. If you're tired of holding it together in hard rooms, appointments, hospital days, and service systems, and then crashing afterwards, you're in the right place. Hi, lovely. Caregiver to caregiver, I'm really glad you're here. I'm Michelle. As a caregiver and an advocate, I know firsthand what it's like to become the walking medical encyclopedia, to fight for continuity so you don't have to repeat your story, and to leave the room thinking, I should have said that differently. No pressure, no perfect routines, and no toxic positivity. Just one gentle reset and one practical next step so you can have calmer days, clearer words, and advocate without self-abandoning. Before we jump in, if you want a simple tool you can use in real time when your body is flooded after hard days, you can check out my 90-second reset. It's a self-paced, trauma-aware toolkit to help you settle your body so your brain comes back online, especially in hard rooms and the crash after. The link is in the show notes. No pressure. Let's take a breath and start. Breathe in, relax your shoulders, and breathe out. Today's guest is Dr. Amy Grimm. Amy is a veterinarian turned certified success and wellbeing coach, and she helped high responsibility humans stop running on empty, not by pushing harder, but by understanding what chronic stress is doing beneath the surface and learning how to step out of survival mode in a way that actually is sustainable. What I love about Amy's message for caregivers is this line: helping people care deeply without quietly erasing themselves, because that is the reality for so many carers listening. They're not chasing hustle culture. They're trying to keep someone safe, keep the house functioning, and keep their own nervous system from collapsing. This is a trauma-aware, non-shaming conversation. We're not adding more shoulds to your day. We're talking about what's real, what's happening in the body, and small, practical ways to protect your capacity. Amy, welcome to Nervous System Reset.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here.
I have been looking forward to our conversation. But before we get into the nervous system side and the practical tools, I want to start with you because your story helps caregivers understand why you see burnout so clearly. You spent years as a veterinarian and medical director in a high-stakes caring role, where being the steady one was expected, where responsibility was constant, and where rest often felt optional. And I think that matters because a lot of caregivers listening didn't burn out because they didn't love the people they care for. They're burning out because they do care and they keep carrying it. Can you take us back to that season for you? What did your day-to-day look like? And what were the first signs your body or your mind started to send that pushing through just wasn't working anymore?
Gosh, Michelle, that is such an interesting question, especially with hindsight being 2020 and me looking back with the knowledge I have now versus then. Because at the time, I didn't really have the language to describe what I was feeling, my experience, and I could tell you I was tired. I could tell you that I was entering the phase of no more F's to give when you're really starting to run on empty, but I didn't understand why. And for me, this actually happened relatively early on in practice. And I think that has a little bit to do with how veterinarians are trained here in the States. For me, I am from South Africa and I grew up there. And I had been accepted to vet school there, and we go in right after high school, and it's kind of this combined undergrad, doctorate type program. And I felt pretty well prepared for that. And then coming here to the States with my parents, I was suddenly just thrown into this completely new system, trying to play catch up. There were volunteer hours that I needed that I didn't have, that other people already have. I felt behind. I felt very challenged, and I worked my butt off. I really pushed hard, and so do so many other veterinary students. There are many, many applications and not a lot of schools, so those seats fill up quickly. And I think that's part of the high achiever tendencies that get selected for, because we have to be overly competitive. We do have to push through a lot. Many times we are studying for multiple exams at the same time and burning that midnight oil and getting up early and doing it all over again, all the while trying to outcompete our colleagues. And we start to treat our exhaustion as evidence of dedication and as evidence that we are deserving. And there's still some fuel left. The goal is to graduate and to get the degree and to go into practice. And by the time I got there, I was already feeling pretty wiped out. My initial goal had been to get my veterinary degree, and I was very interested in research, so I was looking at doing a PhD after that. And by the time I got to the end of vet school, I was like, girl, you just need to start working. There is no way that you can keep doing this. And I thought things would be better. And it turns out that wasn't quite the case. I went into this with the naivety of a new grad, and some of it had to do with the work itself. And then some of it also had to do with skills that I hadn't yet learned. They don't teach us how to people in vet school. They teach us how to work with pets. And I hit the ground running. I was very excited, passionate, willing to go the extra mile, collaborating with my colleagues and just being very caring and attentive to my patients. And I really love working with them. And like you mentioned already, it's not our love for them that's the problem. That's not draining us. It's often that we don't know how to replenish ourselves. And now I know what was happening to me back then, but at the time it just felt like, man, I'm doing the thing that I spent my entire life working towards. I got there. I achieved the goal. I am helping my patients. I'm making a difference in the lives of my clients. And I don't feel good. I feel tired, feel a little resentful. I worked so hard to get here, and this is it. And it kind of brings me back to what you asked about the first signs that I noticed. Looking back now, I know those were the first signs. For me, it was this exhaustion, this building of the resentment and frustration at the profession in general. It was an increase in my sarcasm. I have a kind of dark, ironic sense of humor, but there's a point where it kind of tips over the edge. And I was also starting to withdraw. So I really didn't have the capacity to connect with my friends in a meaningful way. And I found myself pulling myself back, not wanting to go out to social events. Many of my friends are also veterinarians or in the veterinary field. And I knew that conversation would ultimately turn to work somehow, whether that was like a cool, interesting case or just asking for support on something that they'd seen. And I just did not have the patience for it or the capacity for it. So I just kind of became this little hermit living in my house and being really angry that I had to go to work and then getting home and being really angry that I was too tired to do anything. So you think that I would have made a connection at that point, but I honestly didn't. I kept pushing through. I kept telling myself that things would get better. Maybe if I just figured out how to be more efficient, maybe if I figured out how to handle certain clients better, more gracefully, then maybe I wouldn't be carrying this emotional or mental load home with me. There was always this underlying thought or script in the back of my mind that there's something I should be doing better. And that's really what pushed me to keep going past my threshold. And I finally figured out that I was suffering from burnout and also symptoms of empathic strain by the time I was ready in that stage 4 zombie phase on autopilot, showing up to work, doing the things that need to get done, but that purpose and the meaning and the joy that was once there had seemed to just disappear. I was still responsible. I was getting things done and I was being a good doctor and seeing my patients and hitting my production goals and all of those other things behind the scenes. And it just felt like nothing. And I wrote about this recently, an experience that I had. I remember staying late at the hospital one day because we had a patient come in who had a foreign body. I honestly don't even remember what it was, if it was like a stone or a sock or whatever, but this dog had eaten it and it had gotten stuck in the intestinal tract and the owners hadn't noticed for several days, and now they're bringing the dog in 5 minutes before closing and want me to do something about it. So I ended up staying there with one of my technicians and we didn't even wrap up until 9 o'clock at night. And I just remember looking in her eyes and seeing the utter just exhaustion and emptiness being reflected back at me. And it was a successful surgery. The dog recovered and everything past that was great. But I remember driving home and not even feeling proud, excited, anything. I just felt almost nothing, detached. And maybe beneath that detachment, there was some festering resentment still, is this really my life? And it was just such a hard place to sit because I actually love surgery. That's what I specialize in now. I still practice as a veterinarian in addition to doing coaching. But at the time, it felt like nothing. This was just how it was going to be, and I was doomed to go through this for the rest of my life. So I wish I could tell you a story about how I caught myself early on, but the reality is that most of us don't know our threshold until we've gone over it and we move into those deeper signs of distress. And yeah, that's where I found myself for sure.
And it's interesting for me because those same feelings happened before my burnout, where you do just keep pushing and pushing. And as a caregiver, generally you have to get up during the night if there's any machines and stuff that you need to attend to, medications that need to be administered. So you are exhausted because you're always having this broken sleep. And even if someone steps in, I was still waking up as if I could hear the machines beeping and the machines weren't there to beep in that instance, for example, or somebody might have been there because I'd been up for 7 straight and I just needed a moment. And I didn't know what it was either because nobody really talked about it. There wasn't any resource 15 years ago, 10 years ago that was really in your face or accessible that you could, or even another medical professional or a friend who was I think you might need to get some support because I think you're actually past your threshold of being able to cope day to day. And when I look back, I wish somebody had just said, I can see that you keep telling me that you're fine, but I think maybe you just need to pause and get some help because you're feeling angry at yourself. You're feeling angry at not being able to go with your friends, that now no one considers you to go to the movies because they know that you're in this position, and the loss of friends and this process of just feeling bone deep exhaustion, not being able to sleep because I was running over what I hadn't achieved because we'd had a crisis during the day and we'd ended up in hospital, or I'd forgotten to eat. And now I just wanted to eat easy, accessible junk food. And as you're talking about, it stacks on top of each other. And when you're in it, you just don't see it unless somebody is there. And so I felt really alone. I felt shame. I felt the resentment. I loved the people that I care for, and I kept pouring and pouring in. And managing meltdowns, trying to regulate and stay regulated myself became harder to do. I felt like my bandwidth was gone from all the way out here and everyone telling me I don't know how you keep going. And then I felt myself, but I didn't want anybody to know that I was about to snap. And that then became health concerns. My gums were bleeding. I wasn't well in myself. And there was genuine medical things that went on. And for yourself, when you're looking back, what do you wish someone had said to you then that would soften the shame and help you feel less alone and more supported in that space?
Yeah, that's a question that I ask myself continually, because coming from such a competitive environment and having these perfectionist tendencies and overachieving tendencies and tying my productivity to my self-worth, if you had said to me, I see that you're struggling, I think in that moment I might have taken it as an attack on my identity, just because it was so deeply tied to the work that I do. And I remember one of my early bosses sitting me down and having a chat with me. And it was more along the lines of, we've noticed that your sense of humor getting kind of mean. We know you have a pretty dry sense of humor. We know that you like to joke and things like that, but we've noticed a change. And at the time, I was just really annoyed that somebody would even say that to me. So it's something that I sit with, because I think maybe if somebody had approached me more from the sense of maybe asking how I'm doing, and then I would have just told them I'm fine. But then having the patience to sit with me and say, okay, what is fine? Can you tell me what's actually happening? I think that would have been a doorway to a much more useful conversation, rather than me just feeling attacked because suddenly my jokes aren't landing, or people think that I'm being mean or not showing up in the way that I'm supposed to. So then you go down that negative self-talk road of, okay, you're not being a good doctor and you're not being a good human being, and beating yourself up even further. Yeah, so it's something that I sit with, because I know that younger version of me would have been very resistant to it. And at the same time, I think maybe just a different approach, maybe more of a side door approach would have helped me understand that, hey, this isn't normal and this isn't just how it is, which is often the story we tell ourselves.
I think what I'm hearing in this journey that you've also been on is that it's more about the record that we're playing about should be expected, because there are times where the general public would make comment that I gave birth to them, and so how could I not expect to have this situation? And so there's this societal expectation that you stepped into this role, you need to suck it up because this should have been expected. You should have already known that this pathway that you've taken, whether that's career, whether that's as a parent, whether that's as somebody who's chosen to be a caregiver. I've heard nurses talk about the violence that they experience at the hands of patients, and that they're just told that's part of the role, when it shouldn't be the part of the role for anybody. It's the same as parents who have children on the spectrum who have massive emotional meltdowns. It's not just the mental toll of regulating yourself to help them regulate, but it's also the navigation of times the physical violence that they are doing to themselves or to another person. And that has a physical toll, a mental toll, an emotional toll. So when we're talking about burnout and our nervous system, it's not just one tiny little rung that you're talking about. This is across multi areas of your person, of the role that you're playing. And something that really matters to caregivers over time, and we talked about this and you talked about it just a little bit ago, the constant vigilance becomes a part of like your nervous system state. It becomes not just a role. Can you unpack that a little bit in plain language?
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to quickly circle back to this wider lens that you've opened up, because I'm guessing that you and your listeners are probably familiar with the World Health Organization's definition of burnout, which is an occupational phenomenon that is a result of chronic, unmanaged workplace stress. And then we have the three main characteristics. There's the total exhaustion and the cynicism and the reduced efficacy. And while that is accurate, for me, coming from a nervous system perspective, I also think that it is an incomplete definition, because as you've alluded to, this affects us as a whole human being. Even if your work is the primary cause of stress for you, it doesn't stay there. You're bringing this home with you. And for somebody who's in a position where they're caregiving to loved ones at home, if they have any kind of job outside of that, that energy and experience is going with them out of the home as well. So that's the reason why I love nervous system regulation work, because it really helps to treat us from that whole human kind of perspective. And the way that I like to think about burnout is that it is a predictable nervous system state when your output is chronically higher than your input. So you are just not replenishing your own energy reserves. And when I talk about the nervous system, I'm talking about our autonomic nervous system, which has the two branches, the parasympathetic and sympathetic. And the parasympathetic, that's your rest and digest, your calm and connected state. That's where we can do a lot of healing. That's where we can be in service. And the sympathetic state, that's that state of arousal. So that's fight, flight, or freeze. And your nervous system, the autonomic part of it, you can think of it like this giant radar that's constantly scanning for safety and danger. And it's scanning everything around you and taking in so much information externally, so your environment. And then it's also taking in a whole bunch of internal information. What's your own digestion and heart rate, your emotions, your hormones. And then it does this really cool thing called neuroception, which is this unconscious communication with all the other nervous systems around it. So that's kind of like the vibe check. And when we are in a role in which we care a lot and we have a lot of responsibility and we're in service, tiny little things like maybe you forget to do something, or maybe there's just a whole bunch of paperwork piling up and you haven't had time to make the next appointment. Or in my case, it was a stack of prescription refills and callbacks that are piling up on my desk no matter how much I try to get through them. Our nervous system views each and every one of those as little threats. They're not real life or death threats, but it doesn't know that. So there's sort of this low level sounding of the alarm the entire time. And then there's also the bigger things, like you mentioned, violence. Like that in itself, our exposure to secondary traumatic stress and environmental stress, all of those risk factors, they are slowly triggering our little nervous system all day, every day. And we get pushed into this hyperactivated state of arousal, that fight, flight, or freeze, without really even noticing, because this is just the work that we do. It's baked into whatever it is, whether that's being a mom or whether that's being an ER physician. These are the things that are happening to us. And what happens is, as you were describing earlier, you felt almost like that closure where you were losing the ability to respond and do the things that you normally would. That's because your own zone of resilience, that regulated state, it can start to shrink. And we just start to cope and we learn how to survive. We do things a little differently. We push a little harder. We tell ourselves that it's because we care, which it is, and at the same time, we don't notice that the temperature is slowly rising, and we're learning to cope in that activated state. And that is very energetically costing. It's neurologically taxing. That's why we feel emotionally and mentally drained. But we don't know anything different, so we keep on keeping on. And at some point, our nervous system says, hey, friend, we don't have the energy to keep you up here anymore. So now we're going to have to start shutting things down. And it's really just trying to protect you. But at the same time, because we're so invested, we keep going. And this part to me is just so sad and ironic, because we all know if you have a cell phone and the battery is starting to die, maybe you can get away with putting it in airplane mode for a while. But eventually, you got to plug it in. You have to recharge it. And if you don't, it's going into shutdown. And that's exactly what burnout is. That's now this hypo-activated state, really low energy. And this is where we see the symptoms of distress. This is where things start to feel really heavy. Sometimes we can feel stuck. This is also where we'll start to experience burnout and depression and just the going through the motions. And I think viewing it that way, especially coming from a medical background, I wish this is the kind of information and training I'd received early on, because it really helps me sort of partition these different pieces, and it gives me a tool to think about how to move through them as well. And I just remember feeling some of the hypervigilance, right? We have our risk exposure to the different types of trauma and stress around us. And it's almost like your worldview becomes kind of narrowed. You're not just doing the work. It's not like you're just taking care of a patient or their appointments. There's this constant vigilance beneath. That's the constant monitoring, anticipation of potential problems, remembering things that you may have forgotten and then they pop into your mind and then they disappear again. All of the decision making, the responsibility. So your alarm, it never really turns off. It's just silently in the background, letting you know that there's a threat here all the time. And your brain and your body don't get the memo of, hey, we're actually safe. This is not life or death. And instead, we keep bracing and we keep asking, what else do I need to be ready for? What else could go wrong? What else do I have to plan for? Just what else the entire time. And I think that can lead us to become pretty negative and cynical because it feels like this is the way it's always going to be. And I think for me, that's where some of the resentment came in because I didn't like feeling that way in the first place. And then on top of the resentment, then there's the guilt because I shouldn't be feeling like this is the story we tell ourselves. But I think that hypervigilance, it really kind of locks us in, and it's almost like putting blinders on where you cannot see outside of your own perspective at that time. And I think that's one of the most challenging parts about recovery is really creating awareness around that and knowing that that worldview or perspective is not permanent, even though at times it can definitely feel like it is.
I think the other thing is also the recognizing the white flags, those small moments in our body that says you need a break, you haven't fueled your body, you need to pay attention to the fact that your mouth feels like a Sahara desert because you've forgotten to drink today. Wonder your head is thumping. All of our basic needs because of the fact that in our role as a carer, and I'm sure that translates to doctors, nurses, anybody who's looking after a patient, veterinarian, psychiatrist, psychologist, is that when you have somebody who is reliant on you for survival, you have that always on mentality. And for me, that's even in your sleep. You're aware of noises, you're aware of the different sounds and things. Because of that, you can walk into a room and go, what's wrong? You pick up on the nuances and the tiny things, that there isn't this massive breath moment. And just to name it, so that if our listeners are thinking, hey, that's me, I experience those things, I want them to know that it's not a character flaw. It's our nervous system doing what it is meant to do in those situations where we are having to try and mitigate a crisis, a meltdown, a change in blood sugar, noticing and picking up on these things. And because every single person's life story is unique and individual, that then translates to, if you're a caregiver, that every patient, every loved one that you support, there isn't another person that's exactly like them anywhere in the world. So every single time someone goes to an appointment and they feel dismissed because they're put into a box of their medical condition, but they're not holistically reviewed as a human soul who has many working components. I think that is the part that is a struggle, is that you're constantly advocating for a world or for anyone that you're kind of coming into contact with, you as that individual, that how this condition affects me is not how that affects Barbara down the road. It's not how it affects Billy with because he may have 3 other comorbid conditions that we are working on with multiple medical professionals. And so as caregivers, I think, and as the loved ones, the medical professionals who are providing the care, that has to be part of the care plan, is that every time we meet with them, this is new. This is different. My body reacts differently to the person that you saw beforehand. And I think that's when we're talking about our nervous system with the ebbs and flows, it becomes more in between with our parasympathetic and all of our nervous systems, where we're going into fight and flight or fawn, or we're feeling relaxed, but only for a smidgen of a second. And what we're doing with this conversation and with these understanding of what's going on is we want to give more space in between the dips and the flows, and we need those dips and flows. It's a good thing to have up and go. It's a good thing to pause and reflect. It's important to be able to rest. And we're talking about being always on. never switching off. What does always on look like in the body, even when nothing is happening in the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. And for me, the simplest way that I like to think about it is your body is acting like the emergency is already happening. You're always bracing for it and prepared, and your body doesn't know the difference between that and this is actually the real emergency. So even when you're just sitting on the couch at home, you might notice that your shoulders are elevated. Maybe you're clenching your jaw. You notice that your breath is more shallow, or maybe your heart rate is just a little bit faster than it normally is. We also constantly be checking our phone, right? We're looking for the next incoming threat. Or for other people, because this really is a personal and individualized experience, it could be the opposite of constantly checking. It could just be completely zoning out and just trying to get any kind of relief. And I think you'll feel tension, sensations in your body that are tightness, difficulty relaxing. Some people, they just cannot sit still at all. They try to sit down for 5 minutes and then they're back up again doing something, or that restless leg syndrome. And overthinking is also a big one, especially with the women I'm working with, because these are all higher responsibility career performers. So they're always thinking about work. And I imagine that's very similar to your experience and the women with whom you're having these discussions. Is there's always something more to do. So just constant rumination, replaying things, planning for things. And yeah, like you mentioned before, difficulty sleeping, trouble falling asleep, or waking up at 3 a.m. with your brain having a whole lot of things to tell you that don't matter in this particular moment, but hey, I guess we're doing this now. That's a very big one as well. And it's just an indication that you are carrying too much. As you said earlier, it's not a personality flaw. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. This is information. This is feedback from your body saying, hey, maybe the output is unsustainable. We need to work on the input now, the replenishment. And nervous system regulation really helps you to do that in a way that's supportive and expands that resilient zone. Like you were talking about, when we're stressed and under pressure, things seem bigger than they were before, insurmountable. And that's because that little zone of ours is really narrowed. And there's many different things that we can do to help expand it. And this is just one of many tools that helps you take that on switch and maybe just turn it off for a little bit, just to give yourself a little break before it's going to come back on again. It doesn't mean the goal is to switch it off completely. That's never a good way to think about it. Those perfectionist tendencies tend to keep us stuck. But knowing that we have some control over switching the alarm off. We're not going to have as much control over when it decides to go off or how frequently, because that's just your nervous system doing its job. But when we can become aware of that process and then consciously or intentionally involve ourselves and maybe take the foot off the brake just for a little bit, that's really how we can make caregiving or any type of career or choice that you're making feel more sustainable rather than something that's just continually draining you.
And because what I'm hearing is it's uncomfortable. In that space where we've lost our bandwidth, it feels unsafe. And for caregivers, even when you're exhausted, because caregiving isn't a 9 to 5, it's a 24-hour story that you're constantly living. And so finding those pockets of moments to kind of help bring back more bandwidth seem far and in between. And I was listening to a caregiver who goes to work and cares for their partner, and how angry he felt at people recommending self-care, that he needed to take it. And he was passionately explaining where am I finding this hour? Where am I doing this? Because I'm trying to sustain our household whilst then going to appointments and managing medications and all of these things. And here we focus on micro moments that can be habit stacked so that there are no additional weight added or extra time needed. Because when we look at caregiving as this long distance haul, haul, which generally it is, it's not like a short sprint 90% of the time. We're talking years, whole lifetimes of being in this role. When you look at taking 2 minutes while you make a coffee to use breathing as a regulation strategy, and that you do that every day, or you do that 3 times a day because you make a coffee 3 times a day or 5 times a day, that adds to 10 minutes. And so when you're looking over 30 years or 20 years or 10 years, that then becomes such a stackable and buildable strategy that then you actually go, I've actually done a whole year's worth of self-regulation and investing in myself. Because we experience this time shortage where we feel like we're constantly running, taking these small moments to regulate, taking these small moments to appreciate where we are, to reground and find some level of additional bandwidth. Because the more bandwidth we have, the more we can pour back into our loved ones, the better we are at being caregivers. And caregiving includes like such emotional labor, anticipating needs, managing appointments, tracking symptoms, managing other people's emotions, trying to work out what the medical professional's personality, how they are interacting. When we look at a hospital stay, you might have to interact with 20 different personalities. And as the advocate, you have to try and stay harmonious to manage all of those different people coming in and out of your space, that they all work differently. They all have a different approach. There's no continuity between any of them. And nobody looks at that as holding things together, including at home too, because each one of your loved ones has a different way of operating. Each one has a different way of receiving love, giving love, communicating, different sense of humor. So as a caregiver, you're kind of like an orchestra. You're at the head of a massive band and you're having to coordinate and orchestrate all of these different people whilst trying to remain respectful, calm, regulated, not be too angry, not be too sad. There are all of these unspoken expectations because when you express them, they have consequences. So how does that kind of invisible load shape burnout?
I think it has a huge impact, whether you're looking at burnout or compassion fatigue. This kind of load, it goes back to that hypervigilance, being always on and always bracing. And when we're carrying a big mental or emotional load, we can sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that, hey, maybe I didn't do that much today. Sometimes we only look at the physical things that we accomplished, and maybe it wasn't that much. Maybe you only got 3 to 5 things done. And in that moment, I think it's important to really take a step back and say, okay, but what was going on mentally and emotionally? Because like you mentioned, there is a lot of things happening in the background. You are managing other people's emotions. You are, in some circumstances, trying to protect family members, keeping everybody calm. And that's in addition to all of the daily things like remembering birthdays and groceries and getting laundry done. And your brain is constantly trying to anticipate needs, anticipate potential problems. You might be carrying some guilt with you because you feel like you're not doing enough, because you're looking at the checklist of things to do instead of looking internally. And this is your brain, this is your nervous system working overtime. Like, this is energetically costing and very taxing to the body. So I would really offer in those moments to give yourself compassion. Of course, it feels this way. Of course, I'm tired and it doesn't seem like I got much done. And at the same time, look at what I'm carrying. Can I acknowledge that? Can I offer myself something that I would say to a friend who is experiencing this? And that in and of itself helps to lighten the load. It's not some magical cure that's going to make all of the work go away, But at the same time, even just that little bit of levity can really help move you more towards that resilient state where you can be just a little bit more calm and connected with yourself, which I think is really important because we extend that compassion and that connection to the people that we love, everybody around us. And so often it feels like because we're burned out, there's nothing that's really left for us. And I think so many caregivers are waiting for someone to give them permission to care for themselves in the way that they care for others. And a huge turning point for me was realizing that permission, it needs to come from me. In the work that I was doing, the animals that I love, they didn't need some like crotchety, sarcastic vet coming in. And when you're in that state, you're probably not listening to the client concerns and being the most receptive either. And I think about that the same as the people you love. They don't need a version or want a version of you who's constantly running on empty. They really need and want that version of you who has energy left to actually enjoy your own life and take care of yourself too.
I think a lot of listeners who will hear what you're talking about, they don't think they're allowed to need support until they've reached that level of collapse. It could be from shame, it could be from guilt, it could be from a perceived concern that their loved one will think that they don't love them anymore. And they'll say, other people have it worse. I should be able to handle this. What do you say to the person who knows something isn't working, but doesn't feel burned out enough to ask for help?
Yes, my mind immediately goes to what I would tell myself, and that is, it's not a competition. That's something that speaks to me and I guess my overachiever nature. And if I were being more caring with myself, I would also say, you deserve to be cared for as well. And thoughts that I like to practice now when I catch myself questioning whether or not I deserve to take a break, sit down for 5 minutes, go home on time, little things like that. I tell myself, okay, just because I can doesn't mean that I should. And another thing that I say to myself is my worth is not measured by how much I carry. This is enough. And I do have to repeat those things to myself on a daily basis. And I do think that it helps to lighten some of the load and really help me see myself as more of a human, not as a resource, because as resources, we can get used up pretty quickly. We have a willingness to help, we care, and so often that can become a vulnerability as well. And we have to protect that if we want to keep showing up and be present and care in the way that we do. Because if we burn ourselves out, or if we're only asking for help once we're really suffering from these more clinical signs of distress, we kind of take ourselves out of the game for a bit, and we're not able to show up in alignment with what we want, the care that we want to offer, our own values. Recovery takes time. And yes, there always is a path to recovery. And at the same time, if you catch yourself up here instead of at rock bottom, that pathway is going to be much easier and look very different than if you're only asking for support or thinking that you somehow deserve it once you're already suffering so much more. That's going to take a lot more time and patience, and also add extra things to your day that you're trying to avoid in the first place because you want to be present to do the caring.
I think what I'm hearing is that it's important to be seen, to be heard, and to be supported, and that it's okay to share the load. It's okay to seek services if you're on your own. It's okay to talk to community-led practices or programs. It's okay to reach out to family, and they may not be able to understand exactly what's going on for you because they're not living your 24-hour story, but they can pick up the small areas that are not specific to that role that add to the load. And I want to talk a little bit about boundaries in a way that doesn't feel like blame, because we really want our caregivers to understand that boundaries and compassion live side by side in order for us to live in an ebb and flow state. Even your boundaries and your compassion will change over time, like a river. I like to think that The banks are your boundaries and your water is your compassion, and you can't live one without the other. So when you're a caregiver, a lot of the time you generally can't just do less. You can't be like, okay, I clock out. No, you just manage your own medications or your feeds or whatever it might be. That's just not an option. So what does protecting capacity look like in real life when you don't have that genuine moment of being able to just step away and not do it?
Yes, I think that's a great question because sometimes you just genuinely have responsibilities that you cannot remove. And I think we can become stuck when we're asking the question of what can I eliminate? Where can I put a boundary, a wall up here? And I think we need to take a step back and say, okay, these actual responsibilities, now let me take a look and ask myself, what are things that I can stop carrying emotionally or mentally? I still need to do X, Y, and Z, but where can I potentially ask for help? Where could I potentially lower my expectations? What is good enough? What does that look like? What does that mean to me? Can I allow myself to be imperfect? And there's also a lot of work around letting it be okay for somebody else to be disappointed. That's a really tough one to sit with. It's one that I still struggle with, is saying, okay, you're allowed to be disappointed, because our boundaries, we don't want them to be so rigid that we're locking people out or that we are keeping ourselves within. We really want to be able to look at each situation individually. And for me, that comes back to the emotional load that I'm carrying and my own self-talk, my own beliefs about what I should be doing, and allowing myself to say, okay, I know when I say yes, I can do this, and I know when I say no, I really cannot, and be okay with that. And the capacity, it's not just about the hours, especially for somebody who's on 24 hours a day. It really comes back to your nervous system load and where can you fit within that resilient zone where you can handle the capacity without constantly tipping over into distress. And as you mentioned before, it's not that we're never meant to. We're supposed to be mobilized and energized in certain situations that call for it. And then what can I do to actually bring myself back so that I can do that again every single day? So when I look at boundaries more as a personal reflection of my values, what's in alignment with my life, and how can I make that work in a way that feels cohesive and supportive to what I can offer others as well, without it necessarily consuming or depleting me.
I really like how you're naming that transition and how reframing it so that it's not laced with guilt or shame or overthinking with the I should-haves. And I found that I was constantly saying yes, even when I didn't have space for it, because I would think, if I was in that situation, I would want somebody to step in and help me in that way. And so I was adding to my load without realizing it. And able to say no is important. Being able to reframe it to what your capacity is important. But I found that I was constantly worried that then that person, who may have been very few who stuck around, would leave if I didn't say, yes, no worries. Whereas since I've started this journey of having compassion and boundaries and being able to reposition of, I can't do that today, but I have capacity to do something different. Or I'm hearing this, I can't manage that, but I know somebody who could support you in that right now. So that it wasn't just an automatic like no, but it was a way that I could be gentle and respectful of myself, but still show kindness, compassion, and make sure that person felt seen. Because in my role of being dismissed when advocating, being ignored, and then they're having negative consequences to that, that I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel heard. And that was part of my burnout journey, was then feeling like I had no voice, I had no capacity, and being able to have a statement where it provides capacity so that someone can practice it when they need it, to slow the pace, to be able to give themselves a little bit of room. Could you give me a simple capacity sentence that might support a caregiver this week?
Yeah, one that I use myself is I will say to myself, my plate is full. And I also remind myself that I know when my plate is full. I'm not second guessing myself or trying to appease somebody else by squeezing one more thing in there. Like, my plate is full. And I not only say that to myself, I will say that to the person who is asking me as well. And it felt really weird at first because we're used to saying yes and taking more. But eventually just the simple sentence of, no, I cannot. My plate is full. And I don't have to offer an explanation. Sometimes I choose to, sometimes I don't. But what I really think it comes down to is, like declining or setting that boundary, protecting your capacity. What is your reason for it? Bring it back to your why. Why do I do this? What is my purpose? How is this going to further my goals? Because then no matter what sentence you use, you can say it without feeling guilty. And I think once we remove the guilt, so much of the weight gets lifted.
I really like saying or hearing my plate is full, because that's also providing a visual for anybody who needs that as well. And before we move into what tiny practices we can do, I just like to pause to remind our listeners that it's time to take a breath and just let their shoulders drop and unclench their jaws. And you can do an additional one as we keep talking about these mini resets, just breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if you make your exhale longer than your inhale, you'll start helping your nervous system to have a moment of coming down and giving you more bandwidth. So Amy, could we please offer a tiny reset that someone can do in under a minute or up to 90 seconds? The kind of thing that works in the car, in the bathroom, or right after a really hard conversation. And for our listeners, no one needs to do this perfectly. This is just an option to try. So there is no pressure, just real work that can support you. So what's one of your simplest nervous system downshifts from the I'm about to snap or shut down moments?
For me, I really like relying on physical touch. So even as we sit here, sometimes it can be a little nerve-wracking to be a guest and answering questions and not wanting to stumble over your words. So as I sit here, I have my hands sort of just gently caressing the top of my thighs. For me, that's very grounding. It helps bring me back into the present moment. And it's something that I can do when I am with somebody as well, whether we're just sitting together or maybe I am in a meeting or I'm on a particularly emotionally charged coaching call, or even just in the car and I find myself getting frustrated at the traffic. That's something that I can easily do to just bring myself back to the present moment. And also things that fall in line with that, washing my hands. I have to wash my hands between patients. People are washing their hands multiple times during the day. Take that time to really feel the temperature of the water, smell the fragrance of the soap that you're using. If you want to make it just a little bit more luxurious and a treat for yourself, pick a moisturizer or something that you can put on afterwards and just take those few additional seconds to really appreciate that in the moment. Like you said earlier with tying a habit to your coffee consumption, if you can just build that into your day, suddenly you're doing much more regulating than you would have thought. And I mean, there's 101 different things that you can do. But for me, really, that soothing, even just touching my arms or my wrist, that helps me come back to the sensation and bring my brain into the present moment, which then reminds me, okay, let me relax, let me sink into this, take a breath, and really just offer myself some support.
When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the things that I do unconsciously for the same reason, which I have built over time. We're not coming and saying we did this perfectly when we started, that we remembered when we were in a crisis. But the more we habit stacked and the more repetition that we did, it becomes almost second nature that you're not actually consciously doing that process. And so I was thinking about the fact that I have my feet flat on the floor and I push my toes into the ground and add pressure to it because no one can see my feet moving. And even in my shoes, if I'm in a medical appointment, because a lot of medical appointments, the doctor gets to sit under a desk, but they see our whole body language in all of those moments. And so I needed things to help me to bring my brain back online when I felt overwhelmed or I was irritated by being dismissed or not being heard about what we were experiencing because they weren't there to experience it. And so when you were talking, I was like, actually, I'm moving my toes up and down. I'm pushing them into the ground. And that was something that just brought my attention back to it when you were talking about putting your hands on your legs. I also press hands together in different ways underneath the desk or when I'm talking because nobody knows. No one's thinking she's doing compression, she's helping her nervous system. It's not something that anybody is drawing attention to. And so thank
and
you.
Even before our conversation, I was putting my lavender scented moisturizer on my hands and just taking a minute to go,
aromatherapy. We're adding the senses in. The more senses that you can add in, the more your brain will come back into the moment because you're accessing your sight, your sound, your taste, your smell, and that really helps to assist. And that can be done in a really short period of time. And if anyone is listening and they felt nothing or they felt emotional, you're not doing it wrong. Your nervous system is responding to your life and we're wanting to keep it gentle. So there is no perfect overnight remedies for when you're coming through this life and you're experiencing these burnout symptoms because you are on all the time. So there's no pressure. There's absolutely no shame or guilt. If you feel like you're not doing it right, you probably are doing it right. So just take a breath in the moment. As we're coming to a close of our conversation, I just like to ask these quick lightning round short questions. There are 5 of them. So
okay.
Just one word or one sentence that you feel that resonates. So one sign you're in survival mode, even if you're still functioning.
That exhaustion that just doesn't go away even when you try to take a nap or sleep in extra on the weekend. It's just sitting there, the mental and emotional tiredness.
One common myth about burnout you wish would just disappear.
That it is purely an occupational hazard. This is a whole body experience. It is a biological state and it is a predictable outcome.
I like that, predictable outcome. Number 3, a tiny first step for the caregiver who has 0 time.
Not letting your brain tell you that lie. Oftentimes when we are in that hyperactivated state, we really believe that. And if you notice your brain telling you that there's too much to do and too little time, that is a sign to step back and reevaluate the situation. Give yourself a pause.
What's one thing that looks like rest but isn't actually restoring?
Ooh, that's a good one. For me, I got tricked into the zoning out in front of the TV, and I didn't realize for a long time that was coping. That wasn't actually restoration.
Yes, scrolling, snacking, watching. I totally resonate with all of those things that have happened to cope. Even after everyone's gone to bed and we should really be going to bed, our brain is so exhausted that we need that moment and we're not realizing that it's not actually giving us the moment we need. And the last one sentence you want a caregiver to hear today.
Your worth is not tied to your output. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to care more or do more. You are enough. What you do is enough. Your self-worth is not tied to your output.
I particularly feel that in my bones because when you're first starting, and even if you're continuing and not recognizing that your body is working over, you are. If you don't feel like you're doing the same as what you did the day before, it does impact you on a soul level at times, if that is what resonates. I'd love for you to share where our listeners can find your work and more information about Burnout-Free Me.
Yes, thank you. I would say the best place is my Substack, which is Amy Grimm, Burnout-Free Me. That's where I write more in depth and hold these conversations. And some of those are also as podcast episodes on my Burnout-Free Me podcast, if you're somebody who prefers to listen. Both of those have ways to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy if you include my email address in the show notes. But I would say that's where I spend the majority of my time, and if you're open to having a conversation, I would love to meet you.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure that all of your links are in the show notes so that nobody has to remember or recall it after the episode. By all means, come back and listen to the episode as many times as you like, but I'll also include them there so that you've got ease of access to Amy and the wonderful conversation that we've had, and you can build on that. And Amy, I wanted to thank you. This was such a steady conversation today. Today, I want to just recap. We've talked about how caregiving can become constant output, and how always on isn't just a mindset problem. It's often a nervous system state that builds up over time. We also named why reset can feel unsafe, why pushing harder and optimizing more can actually backfire when you're already depleted, and how capacity-led boundaries can protect you without turning your life into one more thing to manage. One practical next step. Your next small step this week is to choose one capacity statement or sentence, just one that you can use when you feel yourself starting to overextend. Something simple like, I can't do that today, but I can do fill in the blank. Or I need 10 minutes to think if you're in a medical appointment and everything is overwhelming. This just slows down the pace so that you can write it in your phone. Practice it when you're in low stakes moments so it's there when you need it. It's really important to give yourself the space to have these tools and practice them when everything is really not at a crisis. Keep it small, keep it kind, one moment at a time. Hey, lovely, caregiver to caregiver, if today's episode supported you even in a small way, do share it with another caregiver who's holding it together in hard rooms too. And if you have a quick moment, leaving a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify really helps us reach more caregivers who need calmer days, clearer words, and practical support. I'll see you right back here next time for another episode. I'm Michelle, and this is Nervous System Reset for Caregivers. No pressure, no perfect routines, and no toxic positivity. Just one gentle reset and one practical next step. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Michelle.